We talked last time about Hungary in 1956, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the kitchen debate. I didn't mention the Third World. The Third World was the name given to countries that were generally not military superpowers. Countries like your Latin American countries, African nations, and Far Eastern nations, not counting Japan and China. But you're generally less power countries, less powerful militarily and less powerful economically, and included such countries as Indonesia. The purpose of these countries, why they were important, is the United States was on one side, the Soviet Union on the other. The Third World countries made up the balance of power. And the United States and Soviet Union each tried to convince these Third World countries that they were more their friends. And these Third World countries would oftentimes pit the United States against the Soviet Union. A lot of them had leanings toward the Soviet Union, and a lot of them had leanings toward the United States. It seemed for a long time that the United States was losing its fight for Third World countries, again owing to the fact that the United States became extremely unpopular due to United States intervention in the internal affairs of a lot of countries. One of the students in the other class wrote a paper on just that very thing. Indonesia actually was the one that formed what's called a non-aligned movement, where they claimed they were neutral. India claimed they were neutral. And they tried to convince the other nations of the world, hey, you don't have to go along with everything that the United States wants you to. Just simply do not align yourself. Now, something I did not mention about the Cuban Missile Crisis . John Kennedy took office in January 1961, and within 3 months, his administration was confronted with what turned out to be a big disaster, the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Now, with all due respect to Kennedy, the planning for the Bay of Pigs invasion had been made by Eisenhower, but it wasn't ready under Eisenhower, so Eisenhower left office before the plan was carried out, and left it up to Kennedy to decide to carry out the invasion or not. Now, essentially, the United States planned to invade Cuba, topple Castro, and restore democracy to the island nation of Cuba. And the place where they would land would be the Bay of Pigs. A bunch of Cubans who were living in Florida trained hard for the operation. And if you go to Miami, Florida today and visit the Cuban population, you will find that to this day, more than 50 years later, the Cuban Americans still hate President Kennedy. It is known that President Kennedy promised air support for the invaders when they landed on the Bay of Pigs. Well, the invaders crossed the Gulf of Mexico, landed at the Bay of Pigs. They were met by Castro's forces, and Kennedy did absolutely nothing. Kennedy himself admitted that the Bay of Pigs was a mistake, that he should have called off if he wasn't going to support it, he should have called off the invasion. Essentially, I think President Kennedy was afraid of starting World War III, or starting a nuclear war. Anyway, he called off the invasion and left the people who had invaded stranded. They were captured by Fidel Castro and held in Castro's prison for a good many years. Eventually, diplomatic measures worked out the release of a lot of them. Anyway, The next big crisis was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which I talked about. That almost led to what they call an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation that almost led to a nuclear war, perhaps a nuclear war between the United States and Soviet Union. As is true of all of these big movements, they get so big, and after a while they split in two. Such was the case of communism. There was China and the Soviet Union began to split. One of the reasons for the split was Mao Zedong felt like he should be the leader of the communists after Stalin had died. And Khrushchev said, no, a Russian is going to be the leader, and this is a dispute they have not resolved to this day. The fact is, there is no leader of communism. Well, there's no communists, hardly. I mean, the communists are not in power in the Soviet Union or in Russia right now. But in China, so I guess the Chinese leader is the leader of the communist world, such as there is a leader. Second Indochina War, and this was the war where the United States got involved. The first war in Indochina was the war between France and Vietnam, with Vietnam winning. The United States began to move in. Now here's, I mean, to sum up the Vietnam War in a nutshell. You had, on the one side, you had the North Vietnamese, and then on the south, you had the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong were communist who were fighting against the Americans also. So basically, essentially what you had, all of the north was communist, and the south was half communist. South was Viet Cong, which meant that at most only a quarter of Vietnam's population could be said to have been friendly to the United States. But you had the Viet Cong, who were South Vietnamese. What this meant, that there was a real problem for an American soldier who was in Vietnam to tell who his buddy was, or who was on his side and who wasn't. If you met a young Vietnamese man, it was difficult to know whether he was going to try to blow you away or blow you up, or if he was your friend. It has been said that from the beginning we were fighting a hopeless war, and I recall my senior year of high school, we were required to subscribe to U.S. News and World Report, and we would get the magazine mailed to us every week, and we'd bring it to the school and discuss it. But one of the issues had on the front page, I mean not front page, the front cover, is the United States trapped in a hopeless war. Pointing out that we had not really succeeded in getting the Vietnamese on our side. 3/4 of the Vietnamese were against us, including half the Southerners and all the North. And at best, we were a big minority. The Chinese sent advisors in to try to help the North Vietnamese, but the North Vietnamese strategy wound up being the same thing they'd done with the French. If we can just keep fighting long enough, the Americans will leave. So they kept fighting year in and year out. And after about 12 or so years, the Americans had enough and the Americans left. In 1973, a peace treaty was signed. And I recall going to a service held at Lee College, where I was attending at that time, and the president got up and said that the Vietnam War had divided our country like no other war had. That as a result of the Vietnam War, we had a bunch of young people who had burned their draft cards, left the country, dropped out of society. The hippie movement can be blamed partly on the Vietnam War. Again, I know hippieism is somewhat dead now. The children of God, I mean, the young people were dropping out. You might not can blame all this on the Vietnam War, but the Vietnam War tore the country apart, and in such a way that it is never quite, that our country has never quite recovered. Your book says that when China did not really give a lot of support to Vietnam, the Vietnamese then responded by infiltrating the South more and more. Our president that got us more and more involved was President Johnson. Vietnam destroyed his presidency. The next president after Johnson was Nixon. Nixon made overtures to the Chinese. He made a secret agreement with China where he visited China. He visited China and met with Mao Zedong. You see a picture of Nixon shaking hands with Chairman Mao. And this began to open up China to the rest of the world. And China has become more and more opened up to the rest of the world since. I mean, hey, the Chinese really did not have a quarrel with the United States. The United States helped China defeat Japan. The United States had also not set up spheres of influence in China in the late 1800s and did not try to take over Chinese territory. So why did China hate us? Because we were anti-communist and they were not pro-communist. And also we were supporting Chiang Kai-shek, who was still alive at the time. Nixon began the process of restoring relations with China. The two sides agreed to put aside most of their differences, reduce tensions in Asia, and with China no longer seemingly willing to back Vietnam, Vietnam agreed to a peace treaty in 1973. And 2 years later, they illegally attacked South Vietnam, and the United States refused to help. Khrushchev gave way to Brezhnev. Brezhnev was to govern the Soviet Union for many years, about 20 or so years. Some of the words that you'll run into if you're studying the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union, one of the words you run into is détente. That was supposedly a Russian term that meant it was similar to Khrushchev's peaceful coexistence. We're going to try to be friendly with you. We're going to try to overlook our differences. The Helsinki Accords were signed. I'm not going to write them down, and they won't be on the test. The Helsinki Accords simply stated that all the boundaries of Europe that had been established since World War II were now finalized and could not be changed. This treaty has been held up until recently when Russia tried to expand its territory into the Crimea. But otherwise, the boundaries that were set up after World War II, and what the Helsinki Accord did was give legal, formal recognition to the fact that the Soviet Union controlled the countries of Eastern Europe. Again, all countries on both sides of the Iron Curtain signed the accords.